The grand chamber of the Zephyrian Empire stretched for nearly a kilometer in every direction. Crystalline walls reached toward a ceiling that seemed to touch the stars themselves, and the floor was made of polished obsidian that reflected the light of 1,000 floating orbs. This was where the mightiest empire in the galaxy made its most important decisions, where the fate of entire worlds was decided with the wave of a clawed hand. Ambassador Marcus Chun sat alone at a simple wooden table in the center of this vast space, looking remarkably small and unimpressed. His dark suit was wrinkled from the long journey through hyperspace, and his graying hair needed a trim. Most beings would have been overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the room, the weight of history pressing down from above, but Marcus just adjusted his reading glasses and opened his morning newspaper. The headlines were typical for Earth's global times. Stock market fluctuations, a new movie breaking box office records, weather patterns, and a small article about his own diplomatic mission buried on page 7. He smiled at that last part and took a sip from his coffee thermos, which had somehow stayed warm during the 3-day journey to the Zephyrian capital world. Emperor Vexheim Morthul entered the chamber with the subtlety of a solar storm. Standing 4 meters tall, his scaled hide was the color of burnished copper, and his 6 arms moved with predatory grace. Behind him marched his war council, 12 of the most feared military minds in the galaxy, each representing a different conquered species. Their boots echoed against the obsidian floor like thunder, creating a rhythm meant to strike fear into anyone who heard it. The Emperor's voice boomed across the chamber, amplified by hidden speakers that made it seem as if the very walls were speaking. Human representative, you stand before the eternal throne of the Zephyrian Empire, rulers of 3,000 star systems, conquerors of 1,000,000 worlds, masters of— Sorry, could you hold that thought for just a moment? Marcus interrupted, not looking up from his newspaper. There's a really interesting article here about penguins learning to use smartphones. Apparently, they're quite good at video calls. The silence that followed was so complete that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. Every member of the War Council had frozen in place, their various forms of jaws hanging open in shock. In the 3,000-year history of the Empire, no one had ever interrupted the Emperor during a formal declaration. Wars have been started for lesser insults. Emperor Vexheim's eyestalks twitched dangerously. Did you just interrupt me? Oh yes, terribly sorry about that, Marcus said, finally, folding his newspaper neatly and placing it on the table. He looked up at the towering figure with the same expression he might use when greeting a neighbor over the fence. It's just that I've been traveling for 3 days, and I haven't had a chance to catch up on the news. You understand, I'm sure. The Emperor's scales began to shift color, cycling through deep purples and angry reds. This was a biological response that usually preceded someone being dissolved in acid or fed to the Imperial war beasts. You dare show such disrespect in the presence of your betters? We are the Zephyrian Empire. We have conquered civilizations that existed before your species crawled out of its primordial swamps. Marcus nodded politely. That's quite impressive. 3,000 star systems, you said? And how long did that take you? 15,000 of your Earth years, the Emperor replied automatically, his chest swelling with pride despite his confusion at the human's casual tone. 15,000 years, Marcus repeated thoughtfully, pulling out a small notebook and jotting something down. That's, let me see, about 1 star system every 5 years. Not bad at all. Very steady progress. General Krextar, an insectoid being whose species had been conquered 2 millennia ago, leaned forward with interest. His compound eyes glittered as he processed this strange mathematical perspective. The human calculates our expansion rate, as if reviewing a quarterly earnings report. Well, expansion is expansion, Marcus said with a shrug. Though I have to ask, do you count systems with just gas giants and asteroids, or only ones with habitable planets? Because that would really change the math. The Emperor's confusion was rapidly turning back to rage. Enough of this mockery. You will show proper respect, or you'll be destroyed along with your pathetic little planet." Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small tablet. He tapped it a few times, bringing up what appeared to be a star chart. "Speaking of my pathetic little planet, I should probably mention that we've received your formal declaration of war. Came through our quantum communicator about 6 hours ago. Very official, lots of impressive language about cleansing fire and total annihilation. Our response should be reaching your capital any minute now." As if summoned by his words, a new voice echoed through the chamber. This time it came from the Emperor's own communication array, a series of crystalline structures that connected the throne room to every corner of the Empire. "This is Admiral Sarah Martinez of the Earth Defense Fleet. Your declaration of war has been received and acknowledged. We note that you have threatened to, quote, reduce our world to cosmic dust and scatter our atoms across the void, unquote. While we appreciate the poetry of the language, we feel compelled to point out several factual errors in your intelligence reports about Earth's military capabilities." The Emperor's eye stalks swiveled toward his communication array in shock. "Impossible. How did they penetrate our quantum encryption?" Marcus looked apologetic. "Oh, we cracked that about 40 years ago. We've been listening to your military communications for decades." "Fascinating stuff, really. Did you know that your Third Fleet Admiral has been embezzling funds to buy luxury goods for his 17 wives? The paperwork is quite damning." Admiral Martinez's voice continued from the speakers, calm and professional. "Additionally, your strategic assessment appears to be based on observations of Earth from approximately 200 years ago. We thought you might appreciate some updated information before you commit your forces to what our analysts predict will be a very short conflict." General Thakmore, a reptilian being covered in ceremonial scars, stepped forward. "Impossible. Our spy networks are the finest in the galaxy. We know everything about the human homeworld." "Your spy networks," Marcus said gently, "consist mainly of automated probes that take pictures from the edge of our solar system, which is perfectly understandable, really. Most species would assume that surface scans and energy signatures would tell the whole story. Unfortunately for your intelligence assessment, humans have a bit of a habit of building things underground." The communication array crackled to life again. "This is Dr. James Rodriguez from the Mars Defense Platform. We're transmitting a brief visual summary of our defensive capabilities. Please note that this represents approximately 15% of our total military assets, as the rest are currently classified or deployed beyond your sensor range." A holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber, showing the Sol system. What had appeared to be a single planet with primitive technology was revealed to be something else entirely. Mars glowed with the light of thousands of installations. The asteroid belt moved with purposeful patterns that suggested massive hidden structures. Even the outer planets showed signs of extensive modification. "Sweet merciful void," whispered General Yixhan, a crystalline being whose people had been conquered 3,000 years ago. "The entire system has been militarized." But Marcus was just getting started. Dr. Rodriguez is being modest when he says 15%. The truth is, we're not entirely sure what percentage of our military we're showing you, because we stopped conducting full inventories about 50 years ago. The paperwork was getting ridiculous. Admiral Martinez's voice returned. "For the sake of full disclosure, we should mention that Earth's military doctrine has been based on the assumption that we would eventually face a multi-system empire. Our strategic planning has focused on asymmetrical warfare against numerically superior forces, with an emphasis on rapid deployment and technological advantages." The Emperor's scales had gone completely white, a color that among his species indicated profound shock. "You plan for a war with us?" "Not specifically with you," Marcus corrected, checking his watch. "More like a war with someone like you. Statistically speaking, when a young species reaches a certain level of technology, they're bound to encounter an aggressive empire. It's happened to nearly every species that's achieved faster-than-light travel. We just decided to be ready for it." The communication array buzzed with a new voice, this one carrying a slight accent that suggested the speaker was not originally from Earth. This is Commander Zara Thompson of the Proxima Centauri Battle Group. We want to extend our appreciation to the Zephyrian Empire for providing us with detailed fleet compositions and tactical doctrines through your communications networks. Our analysis suggests that a direct confrontation would result in the loss of approximately 94% of your military assets within the first 72 hours of conflict. General Krekstar's antennae were twitching rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation. This is impossible. Our forces number in the millions. Our ships are powered by the cores of dead stars. We have weapons that can crack planets. Marcus nodded sympathetically. And they're very impressive weapons, too. We've been studying the energy signatures for decades. Plasma-based primarily, with some interesting gravitational manipulation technology. Very elegant engineering. Unfortunately, they're also quite predictable. The holographic display changed, showing a simulation of a space battle. Zephyrian ships, massive and intimidating, advanced in traditional formation toward a small group of human vessels. What followed was not so much a battle as a demonstration of how thoroughly the humans had analyzed their opponents. Every Zephyrian tactic was countered before it could be fully deployed, every weapon system neutralized by precisely targeted electromagnetic pulses. The simulation you're viewing, Admiral Martinez explained, is based on actual combat data from your recent conflicts with the Rigelian Commonwealth and the Andorian Collective. We've been running scenarios based on your tactical patterns for the past 30 years. Emperor Vexhai finally found his voice again, though it came out as more of a croak. 30 years? But first contact was only established 5 years ago. Marcus looked embarrassed. Well, yes, that's when we decided to introduce ourselves formally. But we've known about your empire since shortly after we achieved faster-than-light travel. We thought it would be polite to observe for a while before making contact. Get to know your culture, understand your language, that sort of thing. Our language, General Thakmore demanded. But we only transmitted basic mathematical concepts during first contact. Oh, we learned your language long before that, Marcus said casually. We intercepted your entertainment broadcasts about 60 years ago. Fascinating culture you have, by the way. Though I have to say, your romantic comedies are quite formulaic. There's always the misunderstanding in the second act, followed by the dramatic reconciliation, followed by the wedding ceremony on the flagship. Very predictable structure. The silence that followed was broken only by the soft humming of the chamber's environmental systems. The War Council members were looking at each other with expressions ranging from confusion to outright panic. They had built their empire on the assumption that they were the most advanced, most prepared, most dangerous force in the galaxy. The idea that a supposedly primitive species had been watching them like a nature documentary was fundamentally disturbing. Marcus checked his watch again and stood up from his chair, folding his newspaper under his arm. Well, gentlemen, this has been absolutely fascinating, but I'm afraid I need to head back to my ship. My wife is expecting me home for dinner, and she's making her famous lasagna tonight. I'd hate to miss it. You're leaving? The Emperor managed to ask. Oh yes, unless you'd like to continue with the formal declaration of war. Though I should warn you, if you're serious about attacking Earth, we'll have to respond appropriately. Nothing personal, you understand, just a matter of national security. As Marcus walked toward the chamber's massive doors, his footsteps echoing in the vast space, Admiral Martinez's voice came through the speakers one final time. The Zephyrian War Council has 24 hours to reconsider their decision to declare war on Earth and her allied systems. After that time, we will assume that diplomatic solutions have been exhausted, and we will begin implementing our contingency protocols. We hope for a peaceful resolution to this situation, but we are prepared for any outcome. The doors closed behind the human ambassador with a soft whisper, leaving the most powerful military force in the galaxy sitting in stunned silence, trying to process the fact that their entire worldview had just been turned upside down by a man reading a newspaper. The War Council remained in emergency session for 18 consecutive hours, something that had never happened in the recorded history of the Zephyrian Empire. The massive chamber, usually filled with the confident voices of military leaders planning their next conquest, now echoed with heated arguments and desperate strategizing. Emperor Vexhai paced behind his throne, his 6 arms gesticulating wildly as he spoke. His scales had settled into a muddy brown color that indicated deep anxiety. Explain to me again how our intelligence networks failed so completely. How does a species hide an entire military-industrial complex? General Krextar had been hunched over his data tablet for hours, his compound eyes scanning through reports that made less sense with each passing minute. Your Imperial Majesty, I have reviewed every scan, every probe report, every piece of data we have collected on the human homeworld over the past 2 centuries. According to our sensors, Earth shows the energy signatures of a developing industrial civilization. Nothing more. Then, our sensors are wrong, snapped Admiral Yextor, an amphibious being whose home planet had been one of the Empire's first conquests. The humans just demonstrated technological capabilities that we don't fully understand. Their communications encryption alone is centuries ahead of anything we've encountered. General Thakmore looked up from his own analysis station, his reptilian features creased with confusion. It's not just the technology, Admiral. It's the scale. The simulation they showed us suggests they have manufacturing capabilities that dwarf our own. How does a single-star system outproduce an empire of 3,000 worlds? Maybe they don't, suggested General Yixan, his crystalline form refracting the chamber's light into prismatic patterns. Maybe they're bluffing. The simulation could be entirely fabricated. Emperor Vexhai's eye stalks fixed on his oldest military advisor. Are you willing to bet the Empire on that assumption, General? The question hung in the air like a toxic gas. Everyone in the room understood the implications. If the humans were bluffing, the Empire could call it and maintain their reputation as the galaxy's supreme military power. If the humans weren't bluffing, the Empire would cease to exist. Your Imperial Majesty, Admiral Yextor said carefully, perhaps we should consider the human ambassador's suggestion to reconsider our declaration of war. There is no shame in strategic withdrawal when faced with unknown capabilities. Noscham. Emperor Vexhai's voice rose to a roar that shook the crystalline walls. We are the Zephyrian Empire. We do not withdraw. We do not reconsider. We conquer. General Krextar set down his tablet with a deliberate motion that drew everyone's attention. Your Imperial Majesty, with respect, conquest requires the continued existence of an empire to do the conquering. If the human estimates are accurate, we would lose 94% of our fleet in the first 3 days. That is not a conquest. That is suicide. The Emperor's scales shifted to deep red, but before he could respond, the chamber's communication array activated without anyone triggering it. This was supposed to be impossible. The array was protected by quantum encryption and physical security measures that made unauthorized access theoretically impractical. Good evening, Your Imperial Majesty. This is Dr. Elena Vasquez, Director of Earth's Xenopsychology Institute. The voice was calm, professional, and utterly confident. I hope we're not interrupting anything important. Every weapon in the chamber was immediately drawn and pointed at the communication array, though firing at it would accomplish nothing except destroying their own equipment. The Emperor's voice cracked slightly as he demanded, "How are you accessing our private communications?" "Oh, we're not accessing them exactly," Dr. Vasquez replied cheerfully. "We're just using a spare quantum relay that we installed in your palace about 30 years ago. It's hidden in the decorative crystal formations above your throne. Lovely craftsmanship, by the way. Our artisans were quite impressed with your aesthetic choices." General Yixan looked up at the crystal formations that had been part of the throne room's decoration for decades. "There are human devices embedded in our palace? That's impossible. We scan for foreign technology weekly." "You scan for technology that you understand," Dr. Vasquez corrected gently. "Our devices use principles that your scanners aren't calibrated to detect. It's not your fault, really. It's just a matter of different technological approaches." Admiral Yextor stepped forward, his throat sac inflating with indignation. "This is an act of war. You have violated our sovereignty." Actually, it's an act of diplomacy, Dr. Vasquez replied. We installed those devices to facilitate communication in case of emergencies. Like, for example, when you declared war on us, and we needed to have a frank discussion about the consequences. Emperor Vexhai forced his voice back under control. What do you want, human? We want to offer you additional information that might influence your decision-making process. You see, we understand that you're facing a difficult choice. On one hand, backing down from your declaration of war might damage your reputation among your subject species. On the other hand, following through with it might result in the complete destruction of your empire. The chamber fell silent except for the Emperor's heavy breathing. Dr. Vasquez continued, We've taken the liberty of conducting a comprehensive analysis of your empire's political structure, and we think there might be a third option that preserves your authority while avoiding unnecessary bloodshed. And what might that be? General Krextar asked, leaning forward with interest despite himself. A demonstration. We propose a limited engagement between a small portion of our respective fleets. Something large enough to settle questions about our relative capabilities, but small enough to avoid significant casualties on either side. Admiral Yextor's throat sac deflated slightly. You want us to test our forces against yours in a controlled battle? Think of it as a military exercise with live weapons, Dr. Vasquez suggested. We'll each commit, say, 50 ships to the engagement. The battle will take place in an uninhabited system, and we'll both observe strict rules of engagement to minimize casualties. The winning force will be determined by objective criteria, ships disabled, tactical objective achieved, that sort of thing. General Thackmore was already running calculations in his head. 50 ships would represent less than 1% of our total fleet. Even if we lost every vessel, the damage to our overall military capacity would be minimal. Exactly, Dr. Vasquez agreed. And if your forces prove superior to ours, you'll have demonstrated the Empire's continued dominance without the risk of a full-scale war. If our forces prove superior, well, you'll have valuable intelligence about our capabilities without having committed your entire empire to a losing conflict. Emperor Vexhai considered this proposal, his scales cycling through various colors as he processed the implications. It was clever, he had to admit. A limited engagement would allow the Empire to save face regardless of the outcome. If they won, they could use the victory to justify their continued aggression. If they lost, they could claim it was merely a scouting action and that the real battle would be different. What assurances do we have that this won't be some kind of trap? He asked finally. You have our word, Dr. Vasquez replied simply, and you also have our complete willingness to allow neutral observers from other species to monitor the engagement. We suggest representatives from the Regelian Commonwealth, the Andorian Collective, and perhaps the Centauri Federation. They all have reason to want accurate information about this conflict. This was an inspired suggestion, General Krextar realized. The three species Dr. Vasquez had named were all former enemies of the Empire who would be delighted to witness either a Zephyrian victory or defeat. Their presence would ensure that neither side could claim the results were fabricated. Additionally, Dr. Vasquez continued, we're prepared to make the engagement terms even more favorable to your forces. You may choose the location, the time, and the specific rules of engagement. We'll even allow you to bring twice as many ships as we do, if that would make you more comfortable with the arrangement. General Yixhan's crystalline form flickered as he processed this offer. They're willing to fight at a 2-to-1 disadvantage, in a location of our choosing, under rules we determine. Either they're incredibly confident, or this is the most elaborate suicide pact in galactic history. Or, Admiral Yextor said quietly, they know something we don't. The Emperor's scales had settled into a deep purple, indicating intense concentration. The offer was almost too good to refuse. A limited engagement would satisfy the Empire's honor requirements while providing crucial intelligence about human capabilities. If the humans were bluffing, 50 ships would be more than enough to call their bluff. If they weren't bluffing, 50 ships was a small price to pay for accurate information about humanity's true military strength. Dr. Vasquez, he said finally, We are prepared to consider your proposal. However, we have conditions of our own. Of course, Your Imperial Majesty. We're listening. First, the engagement will take place in the Kepler 442 system, which is uninhabited but strategically significant to both our empires. Second, the rules of engagement will be total warfare with one exception. Disabled ships may be recovered by their respective fleets. Third, we will bring 100 ships to your 50. Accepted, Dr. Vasquez replied without hesitation. When would you like to schedule this demonstration? The speed of her acceptance sent a chill through the War Council. No reasonable military force would agree to such disadvantageous terms unless they were absolutely certain of victory. Either the humans were insane, or they knew something that made the odds irrelevant. 1 week from today, Emperor Vexhai declared. That should give both sides time to prepare their forces and notify the neutral observers. Perfect. We'll see you in the Kepler 442 system in 1 week. Oh, and Your Imperial Majesty, you might want to bring medical ships. Not for your crews, necessarily, but for the psychological trauma that some of your officers might experience when they see what human engineering can really do. The communication ended with a soft chime, leaving the War Council in stunned silence. The Emperor looked around at his advisors, trying to read their expressions. Some looked confident, others appeared worried, and a few seemed genuinely terrified. Well, he said finally, it appears we have 1 week to prepare for the most important military demonstration in the history of our empire. General Krextar, select our finest ships and our most experienced commanders. Admiral Yextor, coordinate with our intelligence networks to gather any additional information about human military capabilities. General Thakmore, prepare our medical ships as the humans suggested. I have a feeling we're going to need them. As the War Council dispersed to begin preparations for the engagement, none of them noticed the tiny crystalline devices embedded in the chamber's decorative elements. The devices that had been recording every word of their discussion for the past 30 years. The devices that were now transmitting detailed information about Zephyrian military preparations to a small blue planet on the edge of an unremarkable star system. A planet where a woman named Dr. Elena Vasquez was smiling as she reviewed the transmitted data, already knowing exactly how the demonstration in the Kepler 442 system would unfold. The Kepler 442 system had been chosen for good reason. Located roughly halfway between Earth and the Zephyrian capital, it contained no habitable planets, no valuable resources, and no strategic installations that either side would be reluctant to see damaged. What it did have was plenty of open space, clear lines of sight, and enough gravitational anomalies to make the battle interesting without being overly hazardous to navigation. Admiral Krextar stood on the bridge of the ZS Inevitable Victory, the Empire's newest and most advanced battleship. Around him, the finest officers in the Zephyrian fleet worked with practiced efficiency, running final checks on weapons systems and tactical computers. Through the massive viewport, he could see the rest of the Imperial task force arranged in perfect formation. 100 ships representing 3,000 years of military evolution and technological advancement. The vessels ranged from massive dreadnoughts capable of cracking planets to swift destroyers designed for rapid strikes against enemy infrastructure. Each ship was a masterpiece of engineering, powered by stellar cores and armed with weapons that could vaporize entire cities. The combined firepower of the task force could reduce a small moon to cosmic dust within minutes. Admiral, reported Commander Vixhan from the sensor station, were detecting neutral observer vessels taking position at the system's edge. Rigelian Commonwealth, Andorian Collective, and Centauri Federation ships, as agreed. Admiral Krextar noted grimly. The presence of neutral observers meant that whatever happened here would be recorded and transmitted across the galaxy within hours. If the Empire won, their reputation would be enhanced. If they lost, well, at least the defeat would be documented accurately rather than being distorted by human propaganda. Any sign of the human fleet? He asked. Not yet, sir. They should be arriving within the next 30 minutes, according to the agreed timetable. Admiral Krextar checked his chronometer. The humans had been punctual in all their diplomatic communications, so he expected them to arrive precisely on time. What he didn't expect was the manner of their arrival. "Admiral," Commander Vixhan's voice carried a note of alarm. "I'm detecting massive gravitational distortions throughout the system. Something's affecting local space-time on a scale I've never seen before." Through the viewport, space itself seemed to shimmer and bend. Stars appeared to shift position, and the normal darkness between them flickered with strange lights. The effect was beautiful and terrifying, suggesting technologies that the Empire had never encountered. Possible explanations? Admiral Krextar demanded. "Unknown, sir. The energy readings are off our scales. Whatever's causing this, it's operating on principles that our sensors can't properly analyze." The gravitational distortions intensified, and then, without any visible transition, 50 human ships simply existed where empty space had been moments before. They hadn't emerged from hyperspace in any recognizable way. They hadn't decelerated from faster-than-light travel. They had simply appeared, as if someone had flipped a switch and decided that reality now included a human fleet. "Sweet merciful void," whispered Commander Yaxtel from the communication station. "How they do that?" Admiral Krextar was asking himself the same question. The human ships were smaller than he had expected, roughly frigate-sized by Imperial standards, but their very presence was unsettling. They moved with a fluidity that suggested artificial gravity control far beyond anything in the Empire's arsenal, and their hulls seemed to absorb light rather than reflecting it, giving them an almost spectral appearance. "Incoming transmission from the human fleet," Commander Yaxtel reported. "Put it through." The main screen flickered to life, revealing a woman in her 40s wearing a crisp blue uniform with minimal decorations. Her expression was calm and professional, but her eyes held a hint of amusement that Admiral Krextar found distinctly unsettling. "Good morning, Admiral Krextar. I'm Commodore Sarah Chun, commanding the Earth Expeditionary Force. I trust our arrival didn't cause any navigational difficulties for your ships?" "What do you know my name?" Admiral Krextar demanded. "Oh, we've been monitoring your communication for the past week," Commodore Chun replied matter-of-factly. "Standard procedure when preparing for military exercises. We like to know who we're working with." The casual admission that the humans had penetrated Imperial communications sent a chill through the bridge crew. If they could listen to military channels, what else could they access? "You said working with," Admiral Krextar noted. "This is not a collaboration, Commodore. This is a demonstration of force." "Of course it is," Commodore Chun agreed. "Shall we begin?" "I believe the agreed-upon rules specified total warfare, with the exception of disabled vessel recovery. Are your ships ready to commence the engagement?" Admiral Krextar looked around his bridge, seeing the confidence of his crew reflected in their postures and expressions. These were veterans of 100 campaigns, soldiers who had never known defeat. "We are ready, Commodore. May fortune favor the worthy." "An interesting sentiment," Commodore Chun replied. "In our culture, we prefer to say may the best preparation win. Initiating combat protocols now." The transmission ended, and Admiral Krextar immediately began issuing orders. "All ships, assume attack formation Theta 7. Target the human vessels, and prepare to demonstrate why the Empire has never known defeat. For the glory of Zephyria." The Imperial fleet moved with predatory grace, their formation spreading out to envelop the human ships in a classic pincer maneuver. It was a tactic that had worked against every enemy the Empire had ever faced, using superior numbers and overwhelming firepower to crush opposition before it could mount an effective response. The human ships, however, did something unexpected. Instead of trying to evade the encirclement or concentrate their forces for a desperate breakthrough attempt, they simply stopped moving. They hung in space like 50 dark stars, apparently waiting for the Imperial forces to close the trap. "Admiral," Commander Vixhan reported, his voice tight with confusion, "the human ships have ceased all movement." They're just sitting there. Some kind of mechanical failure, suggested Commander Yaxtel. Impossible, Admiral Krextar replied. 50 ships don't all suffer simultaneous mechanical failures. This must be some kind of tactic. He activated the fleet communication channel. All ships maintain formation, but proceed with caution. The humans may be planning some kind of surprise attack. The Imperial fleet continued its advance, weapons charging, and targeting systems locking onto the stationary human vessels. At this range, it would be impossible for the humans to avoid the barrage that was about to descend upon them. Even if their ships were more advanced than Imperial intelligence had suggested, 50 stationary targets couldn't hope to survive against 100 moving attackers. Weapons range in 30 seconds, reported Commander Vixon. All ships prepare to fire on my command, Admiral Krextar ordered. That was when the human ships began to change. It started as a barely perceptible shimmer around their hulls, like heat distortion on a summer day. Then the shimmer intensified, and the ships themselves began to blur and multiply. What had been 50 vessels became 100, then 200, then 500. Each ship appeared solid and real, complete with proper mass readings and energy signatures. When the name of the ancestors is happening. Commanda Yaxtil demanded. Commander Vixon's compound eyes were darting frantically between his instruments and the viewport. I'm reading multiple targets for each human ship, sir. But they all appear to be real. I can't determine which ones are the actual vessels and which ones are some kind of projection. Admiral Krextar felt the first stirrings of doubt creep into his mind. Holographic projections? No, sir. These have mass. They're generating heat signatures. They're even producing gravitational distortions. Whatever this is, it's not simple holography. The human fleet, or fleets, since there now appear to be several hundred ships where 50 had been moments before, suddenly came to life. They moved with impossible coordination, like a single organism with hundreds of bodies. Some ships accelerated directly toward the Imperial formation. Others spread out to flank them. And still others simply vanished from sensor screens only to reappear in entirely different locations. Evasive maneuvers, Admiral Krextar shouted, but his order was already too late. The human attack began with surgical precision. Beams of coherent energy, unlike anything in Imperial arsenals, lanced out from dozens of human ships simultaneously. But instead of trying to destroy Imperial vessels, the beams seemed designed to disable them. One by one, Zephyrian ships found their engines failing, their weapons powering down, their life support systems reduced to minimum functionality. Report. Admiral Krextar demanded. We're losing ships, sir, but not to destruction. The humans are systematically disabling our vessels without causing significant casualties. It's as if they know exactly how our systems work and precisely where to hit them to cause maximum disruption with minimum loss of life. Through the viewport, Admiral Krextar watched in fascination and growing horror as the battle unfolded. Imperial ships, each one a miracle of engineering and a monument to military might, were being neutralized with casual efficiency. The humans moved through the Imperial formation like surgeons, performing a delicate operation, their weapons striking with impossible accuracy. What made it worse was that the humans were clearly holding back. Their weapons could obviously do far more damage than they were inflicting, but they seemed determined to prove their point without unnecessary casualties. It was the kind of restraint that could only come from absolute confidence in one's own superiority. Admiral, Commander Vixon reported, his voice barely above a whisper, "We've lost 60% of our fleet. Engines disabled, weapons offline, life support on emergency power. The humans are offering to tow our disabled vessels to a safe distance where our engineering crews can begin repairs." Admiral Krextar closed his eyes for a moment, trying to process what he was witnessing. The Empire's finest ships, crewed by its most experienced officers, were being systematically defeated by a force half their size using tactics and technologies that defied comprehension. "How long has the engagement lasted?" he asked. 14 minutes, sir. 14 minutes. In 14 minutes, the most powerful military force in the galaxy had been reduced to a collection of floating debris. Not destroyed, which would at least have been an honorable defeat, but carefully and methodically disabled like a parent taking toys away from misbehaving children. The communication system activated, and Commodore Chen's face reappeared on the screen. She still looked calm and professional, but now Admiral Krextar could see the steel beneath her polite exterior. Admiral Krextar, we're prepared to end this demonstration at any time. Your remaining ships are free to withdraw, and we'll provide assistance with repairs for your disabled vessels. There's no shame in acknowledging that you've learned something new today. Admiral Krextar looked around his bridge, seeing the stunned faces of officers who had believed themselves to be the masters of warfare. They'd been taught a lesson in humility that none of them would ever forget. Commodore Chun, he said finally, will we surrender? This engagement is concluded. Thank you, Admiral. We'll begin rendering assistance to your disabled ships immediately. And, Admiral, this doesn't have to be the end of anything. It could be the beginning of something much better. As human ships began moving among the disabled Imperial vessels, providing engineering assistance and medical aid where needed, Admiral Krextar realized that everything he had believed about the galaxy's balance of power had just changed forever. The question now was whether the Empire would be wise enough to adapt to this new reality, or whether it would cling to old assumptions until they destroyed it entirely. Looking at the neutral observer ships at the system's edge, their sensors no doubt recording every detail of the Empire's defeat, Admiral Krextar knew that word of this engagement would spread across the galaxy within days. The age of Zephyrian dominance was over. The question was what would replace it. The journey back to the Zephyrian capital world felt like the longest trip Admiral Krextar had ever taken. The inevitable victory limped through hyperspace with 60% of its systems running on backup power, a constant reminder of just how thoroughly the Imperial fleet had been outmatched. Around him, his bridge crew worked in subdued silence, their usual military banter replaced by the quiet concentration of beings trying to process an impossible defeat. The worst part wasn't the damaged ships or the wounded pride. The worst part was the reports flooding in from across the Empire as news of the engagement spread. Within hours of the battle's conclusion, the neutral observer races had transmitted detailed recordings to every major civilization in the galaxy. The footage was crystal clear. 100 of the Empire's finest warships systematically disabled by 50 human vessels in 14 minutes. Admiral, Commander Vixhan reported, his compound eyes reflecting the subdued lighting of the bridge. We're receiving priority communications from the capital. The Emperor has called an emergency session of the Grand Council. All senior military commanders are ordered to report immediately upon arrival. Admiral Krextar nodded grimly. He had expected this summons, though he wasn't looking forward to explaining their defeat to beings who had never experienced military failure. The Emperor's rage would be legendary, assuming his pride allowed him to acknowledge what had happened at all. Any word from our intelligence networks about how other species are reacting to the recordings? Commander Yaxtel looked up from her communication console. The reports are troubling, sir. The Rigelian Commonwealth has formally requested diplomatic contact with Earth. The Andorian Collective has announced that they're suspending all military operations pending a strategic reassessment of galactic power structures. 3 minor species that were scheduled for conquest have declared themselves under human protection. The implications were staggering. For 3,000 years, the Empire's reputation for military invincibility had been its greatest asset. Species surrendered rather than face Imperial fleets. Rebellions never gained momentum because everyone knew the Empire could not be defeated. Now, in the span of 14 minutes, that reputation had been shattered. Sir, Commander Vixhan added quietly, there's something else. We're receiving reports of civil unrest on 17 colonial worlds. Nothing serious yet, but the local governors are requesting additional security forces to maintain order. Admiral Krextar closed his eyes, feeling the weight of 3 millennia of Imperial history pressing down on him. The empire had been built on fear and superior force. Remove those foundations, and the entire structure became unstable. How many of their 3,000 star systems would declare independence once word spread that the empire could be defeated? The hyperspace journey continued in tense silence until they finally dropped back into normal space near the capital world. The sight that greeted them was both magnificent and ominous. Hundreds of Imperial warships surrounding the planet in defensive formations that spoke of barely controlled panic. Someone in the high command was clearly expecting an immediate human invasion. Incoming transmission from Imperial Command, Commander Yaxtel reported. We're ordered to dock at the primary military station for immediate debriefing. As the inevitable victory approached the massive orbital facility, Admiral Krextar could see the frantic activity of a military establishment trying to prepare for a war it didn't understand. Ships were being hastily refitted with new weapon systems. Construction yards worked around the clock to build additional vessels. Supply convoys moved in constant streams between the surface and the orbital installations. It was all pointless, of course. If the humans could disable 100 ships in 14 minutes, they could probably disable 1,000 ships just as easily. Numbers weren't going to solve this problem. The docking procedure was completed with mechanical efficiency, and Admiral Krextar found himself walking through corridors filled with officers whose expressions ranged from confusion to outright fear. The usual confident swagger of Imperial military personnel had been replaced by the nervous energy of beings who suddenly realized they might not be the apex predators they had always believed themselves to be. The emergency session of the Grand Council was being held in the Empire's most secure chamber, buried deep within the planetary crust and protected by every defensive system the Empire could devise. As Admiral Krextar entered the circular amphitheater, he saw that every seat was occupied. Representatives from all the major military branches, intelligence services, and colonial administration sat in tense silence, waiting for answers that nobody had. Emperor Vexhike dominated the center of the chamber, his massive form radiating barely controlled fury. His scales had settled into a deep crimson that indicated the kind of rage that had historically preceded the destruction of entire star systems. Around him, the War Council sat in positions that suggested they were trying to become as inconspicuous as possible. Admiral Krextar, the Emperor's voice echoed through the chamber with the force of a planetary bombardment. Explain to this council how 100 of our finest warships were defeated by 50 primitive human vessels. Admiral Krextar walked to the center of the amphitheater, feeling the weight of hundreds of stairs. He had rehearsed this moment during the long journey home, but no amount of preparation could make it easier to deliver news that would fundamentally alter the Empire's understanding of its place in the galaxy. Your Imperial Majesty, honored counselors, the engagement in the Kepler 442 system revealed that our intelligence regarding human military capabilities was severely flawed. The enemy demonstrated technologies that are decades, possibly centuries ahead of our own. Murmurs rippled through the assembled council members. General Thackmore leaned forward in his seat. What kind of technologies? Give us specifics. They appear to use some form of dimensional manipulation to multiply their effective fleet size. Sensors indicated the presence of hundreds of vessels where only 50 had originally appeared. Their weapons showed perfect knowledge of our ship designs, striking precisely at critical systems to achieve maximum disruption with minimal casualties. Their movement patterns suggested gravity control capabilities far beyond anything in our arsenals. Impossible, declared Admiral Yextor from the War Council section. Our intelligence networks are the most sophisticated in the galaxy. How could we have missed technological advancement on such a scale? Admiral Krextar looked directly at his superior officer. Because we weren't looking for it, sir. Our assessment protocols assumed that a single system species would naturally be inferior to a multi-system empire. We based our intelligence gathering on that assumption, and that assumption was wrong. Emperor Vexhai's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Are you telling me that our entire strategic doctrine is based on a false premise? I'm telling you that the humans have achieved something that we didn't think was possible, Your Imperial Majesty. They have developed advanced technology without expanding beyond their home system. Their manufacturing base, their research capabilities, their military production, all of it is concentrated in the Sol system, but operating at a level that exceeds our empire-wide capabilities. The silence that followed was broken by Director Zaxxon of Imperial Intelligence, a thin, nervous being whose species specialized in information gathering. Admiral, during the engagement, did the humans make any demands? Any ultimatums? No, Director. In fact, they offered medical assistance to our wounded and engineering support for our damaged vessels. Their behavior was remarkably restrained for a species that had just demonstrated overwhelming military superiority. General Yixhan's crystalline form flickered as he processed this information. They could have destroyed our entire task force, but chose not to. That suggests either remarkable self-control or complete confidence in their ability to handle any retaliation. Or both. Admiral Krextar replied grimly. Emperor Vexhai stood up abruptly, his massive frame casting shadows across the amphitheater. This council will not accept that our empire is inferior to a single-system species. There must be some explanation, some weakness we can exploit. Before anyone could respond, the chamber's communication system activated. The quantum-encrypted channels that were supposed to be absolutely secure crackled to life with a familiar voice. Good evening, Your Imperial Majesty. This is Dr. Elena Vasquez again. I hope you don't mind the intrusion, but we felt it was important to address some of the concerns that have undoubtedly arisen following the demonstration in the Kepler 442 system. Every weapon in the chamber was drawn simultaneously, though pointing them at the communication array would accomplish nothing. Emperor Vexhai's scales cycled through colors so rapidly that they created a strobe effect. How are you accessing this channel? He demanded. This chamber is protected by quantum encryption and physical isolation protocols. Your Imperial Majesty, I think we need to have a frank discussion about the nature of technological advancement. You see, your empire's approach to development has been focused on scaling up existing technologies. Bigger ships, more powerful weapons, larger industrial bases. It's a perfectly logical approach that has served you well for 3 millennia. Dr. Vasquez's voice remained calm and educational, as if she were delivering a lecture to interested students rather than infiltrating the most secure facility in the galaxy. Humanity, on the other hand, has focused on fundamental breakthroughs in physics and engineering. We don't build bigger plasma cannons. We develop weapons that operate on entirely different principles. We don't construct larger fleets. We create ships that can exist in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. Director Zaxxon leaned forward, his intelligence training overriding his fear. Dr. Vasquez, are you saying that human technology operates on scientific principles that we don't understand? Not that you don't understand, Director, but that you haven't pursued. Your species is perfectly capable of developing similar technologies. The mathematics are complex, but not impossibly so. The engineering challenges are significant, but not insurmountable. You simply chose a different path of development. Admiral Krextar found himself asking, why are you telling us this? If you have such overwhelming advantages, why reveal anything about your capabilities? Because, Admiral, we don't want to rule the galaxy. We never have. Our expansion beyond Earth has been purely for scientific research and resource acquisition. We have no interest in conquering your empire or any other civilization. Emperor Vexhai's voice cracked with strain. Then what do you want? We want to offer you a choice, Your Imperial Majesty. You can continue on your current path, attempting to maintain control through military force and intimidation. Based on our analysis, this approach will result in the complete collapse of your empire within 50 years as more species realize that you can be defeated. The chamber fell silent except for the Emperor's labored breathing. Or, Dr. Vasquez continued, you can consider a different approach. We're prepared to offer technological exchange programs, scientific collaboration, and even military cooperation agreements. Not as conquerors or rulers, but as partners in the development of galactic civilization. General Thakmore spoke up, his voice barely above a whisper. You're offering to share your technology with us? We're offering to share some of our technology in exchange for some of yours. Your empire has developed fascinating approaches to stellar engineering, gravitational manipulation, and biological sciences. We could learn from each other. Emperor Vexhai sank back into his throne, the weight of decision crushing down on him. The choice Dr. Vasquez was offering represented more than just military strategy. It would fundamentally alter the entire structure of imperial society. What guarantee do we have that this isn't simply a more subtle form of conquest? He asked finally. You have the same guarantee that we've always offered, Your Imperial Majesty, our actions. We could have destroyed your task force yesterday. We could have crippled your capital world's defenses and forced your surrender. Instead, we're sitting here offering partnership and mutual benefit. Judge us by what we do, not what we say. The communication ended, leaving the Grand Council in stunned silence. Emperor Vexhai looked around at his advisors, seeing uncertainty and fear in their faces. For 3,000 years, the empire had grown through conquest and domination. The idea of cooperation and partnership was foreign to everything they understood about power. But the alternative was the slow dissolution of everything they had built, as species after species realized that the empire was no longer invincible. The emperor's scales finally settled into a deep blue, indicating careful contemplation. This council will recess for deliberation. All department heads will prepare detailed analyses of both options by tomorrow. We will decide the future of the empire based on facts, not fear. As the council members filed out of the chamber, each lost in their own thoughts, Admiral Krextar remained behind. He stared at the communication array that had somehow been penetrated by human technology, wondering if he was witnessing the end of an empire or the beginning of something entirely new. Either way, the galaxy would never be the same. 6 months after the demonstration at Kepler, 442, Ambassador Marcus Chen stood once again in the grand chamber of the Zephyrian Empire. But this time the atmosphere was completely different. The vast crystalline hall still stretched toward the stars, and the obsidian floor still reflected the light of floating orbs, but the sense of menace and imperial arrogance had been replaced by something that felt almost like hope. The wooden table where Marcus had casually read his newspaper was gone, replaced by a circular conference setup with seats for representatives from dozens of species. The throne room had become a diplomatic center, and the change was as symbolic as it was practical. Emperor Vexhai still dominated the space with his impressive physical presence, but his scales had settled into a calm green that indicated thoughtful contemplation rather than rage or anxiety. Around him sat not only his war council, but also representatives from the Empire's scientific academies, industrial guilds, and even colonial administration councils. The decision-making process had become remarkably more inclusive. Ambassador Chun, the Emperor said, his voice carrying none of the thunderous intimidation that had characterized their first meeting, we have completed our analysis of the partnership proposals. The results were illuminating. Marcus smiled, setting down his coffee cup on the conference table. He had brought the same thermos, partly out of habit, and partly because he found it amusing that such a simple object had become legendary among Imperial intelligence services. I'm glad to hear it, Your Imperial Majesty. What did your analysis conclude? General Krextar, who had become something of an advocate for cooperation following his experience at Kepler, 442, activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. Ambassador, our projections show that continued military expansion would result in complete economic collapse within 37 years. The cost of maintaining control over 3,000 star systems while simultaneously attempting to match human technological development would exceed our entire gross imperial product by a factor of 12. The hologram shifted to show a different scenario. However, the partnership model suggests that voluntary cooperation agreements with our member species, combined with technological exchange programs with humanity, would result in a 23% increase in overall prosperity within the first decade. Marcus nodded approvingly. Your economic analysts are quite thorough. Did they also factor in the reduced military expenditures that would come with a shift from conquest-based expansion to cooperation-based development? They did. Admiral Yextor replied from his position near the Emperor's side. The savings are substantial. Maintaining occupation forces across the galaxy is remarkably expensive, especially when those forces are no longer serving as an effective deterrent. Dr. Elena Vasquez had arrived the previous day as part of the human diplomatic team, and she leaned forward with interest. What about the social analysis? How do your people feel about transitioning from an imperial hierarchy to a cooperative federation? Director Zaxxon, who had spent months conducting opinion surveys across imperial space, looked both surprised and pleased as he delivered his report. Dr. Vasquez, the results exceeded our expectations. It appears that the vast majority of our citizens were motivated more by stability and prosperity than by conquest and domination. When presented with the choice between continued military campaigns and increased living standards, 78% prefer the latter option. This was the finding that had surprised everyone, including the humans. The Zephyrian Empire had always been portrayed as a militaristic civilization driven by an insatiable desire for expansion. In reality, most of its citizens were simply trying to live their lives in peace and security, and they had no particular attachment to conquering distant worlds. The member species were even more enthusiastic, Director Zaxxon continued. 96% of our subject races indicated that they would prefer voluntary cooperation agreements to continued imperial occupation. Many of them have already begun developing proposals for trade partnerships and cultural exchange programs. Emperor Vexhai's expression had grown increasingly thoughtful as the reports continued. Ambassador Chun, Dr. Vasquez, I must admit that when we first declared war on your species, we expected either swift victory or honorable defeat. We did not expect to have our entire worldview challenged and found wanting. Marcus chuckled. Your Imperial Majesty, if it makes you feel any better, challenging worldviews seems to be humanity's specialty. We've been doing it to ourselves for thousands of years. It's part of how we developed the technologies that impressed your military commanders. Speaking of which, Dr. Vasquez added, we've prepared some preliminary technological exchange proposals. Nothing that would compromise either side's security, but enough to demonstrate the potential benefits of cooperation. She activated her own holographic display, showing a series of technical specifications that made several of the Imperial scientists lean forward with obvious excitement. For example, we're prepared to share our basic gravitational manipulation principles in exchange for your stellar engineering techniques. Your ability to contain and direct stellar plasma is remarkably advanced. General Yixhan, whose crystalline form had been flickering with interest throughout the presentation, spoke up. Dr. Vasquez, the gravitational manipulation technology alone would revolutionize our transportation and manufacturing systems. But what assurance do we have that you won't use our stellar engineering techniques against us? The same assurance you have that we won't use our existing technological advantages against you. Dr. Vasquez replied simply. We could have destroyed your empire 6 months ago if that had been our intention. The fact that we're sitting here discussing partnership agreements should tell you something about our actual goals. This point had been made repeatedly during the negotiations, but it remained compelling. Humanity's restraint during and after the Kepler 442 demonstration had done more to build trust than any number of formal treaties could have accomplished. There is another matter we should discuss, Emperor Vexhai said, his scales shifting to a more formal purple. The other major powers in the galaxy have taken notice of our negotiations. The Rigelian Commonwealth, the Andorian Collective, and the Centauri Federation have all requested their own diplomatic contacts with humanity. Marcus exchanged glances with Dr. Vasquez. They had expected this development, but it still represented a significant expansion of humanity's galactic diplomatic responsibilities. "We're prepared to engage in discussions with other civilizations," Marcus said carefully, "but we want to be clear that our primary focus remains on building a successful partnership with the Empire. We're not trying to play different species against each other or create competing alliance structures." Admiral Krextar looked intrigued. "Ambassador, are you suggesting that the partnership model could be expanded beyond the Empire and humanity?" "Not immediately," Dr. Vasquez replied. "But eventually, yes. Our long-term vision is of a galactic community based on voluntary cooperation, technological exchange, and mutual benefit. The Empire would be a founding member of such a community, not a conquered territory within it." This concept was revolutionary. For millennia, galactic politics have been based on competition, conquest, and zero-sum thinking. The idea that multiple civilizations could work together for mutual advancement was almost unthinkable to species that had grown up in a galaxy dominated by imperial expansion. It would require a fundamental restructuring of interstellar law, noted legal advisor Texman, an insectoid being whose species specialized in complex jurisprudence. Property rights, territorial boundaries, resource allocation, everything would need to be renegotiated. True, Marcus agreed. But the alternative is continued conflict as various species attempt to match human technological development through military buildup. How many civilizations do you think will survive that kind of arms race? The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Everyone in the chamber understood the implications. If multiple species tried to develop weapons capable of challenging humanity, the resulting conflicts would likely tear the galaxy apart. Emperor Vexhai stood up, his massive form casting familiar shadows across the chamber. But this time, his posture suggested contemplation rather than intimidation. "Ambassador Chun, Dr. Vasquez, honored representatives, this council has reached a decision." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. 6 months of negotiations had led to this moment. The Zephyrian Empire hereby formally accepts the partnership proposal offered by humanity. We will begin the transition from an imperial hierarchy to a cooperative federation, with voluntary participation from our member species. We will establish joint technological development programs and cultural exchange initiatives. And we will work toward the creation of a galactic community based on cooperation rather than conquest. The chamber erupted in a mixture of applause, surprised murmurs, and what sounded suspiciously like several beings crying with relief. Dr. Vasquez was smiling broadly, and even Marcus felt his carefully maintained diplomatic composure crack slightly. Furthermore, the Emperor continued, "We propose that this new federation be based here, in this chamber, which will be expanded and redesigned to accommodate representatives from all member species. Let this place, where an empire once declared war, become the center of galactic peace." Marcus stood up, extending his hand toward the Emperor in the traditional human gesture of agreement. After a moment's hesitation, Emperor Vexhai reached out with one of his massive clawed hands and gently clasped the human's much smaller one. "Your Imperial Majesty," Marcus said, "I think this is the beginning of something remarkable." As the two leaders shook hands, the holographic displays around the chamber shifted to show a new image. Star charts marking not conquered territories or military installations, but trade routes, scientific research stations, and cultural exchange centers. A galaxy connected not by fear and domination, but by curiosity and mutual benefit. General Krextar looked at the displays and then at his former enemies, realizing that he was witnessing the end of one age and the beginning of another. "Dr. Vasquez," he said, "when you first contacted us, you mentioned that humanity had been preparing for eventual contact with an aggressive empire. How long did you actually expect it would take to reach this point?" Dr. Vasquez grinned. "General, our sociologists estimated that it would take between 18 months and 3 years to transition from declaration of war to formal partnership, depending on how quickly your leadership could adapt to new paradigms." And How long has it actually taken? Admiral Yextor asked. Marcus checked his watch, the same simple timepiece he had worn during that first tense meeting. 6 months, 2 weeks, and 4 days. Emperor Vexhi's scales shifted to a warm golden color that indicated genuine amusement. So we exceeded your expectations? By quite a margin, your Imperial Majesty. It turns out that when you're offered a choice between destruction and prosperity, most rational beings choose prosperity. Who would have thought? As laughter filled the chamber that had once echoed with threats of war, Marcus reflected on how dramatically things could change when people were willing to question their assumptions and consider new possibilities. The galaxy was about to become a very different place, and humanity was no longer alone in the universe. But that he thought as he picked up his newspaper to check the day's headlines was exactly what they had hoped for all along.